What's up, everyone? Thanks for checking in again this week, wherever you may be and however you may be listening. If you missed any of the past few weeks of the Football Goons podcast, make sure to go back and check out our 2017 Fantasy Football Rankings podcasts. We're up to our necks in fantasy football prep, so you're in the right place to get all of the info that you need to win your league championship this year. We're doing all the dirty work. You just chime in and join the conversation and have a good time. This week, we got a very special scenario here. Miles is joining us from the state of Texas. So I got to know, is everything really bigger in Texas?
Well, I did have a phenomenal barbecue lunch the other day that I couldn't finish. So that was pretty gigantic. But yeah, I'm coming to you guys from right outside Fort Worth here. Down visiting some family. And I will share one thing, probably my proudest parenting moment. So I was pretty excited about that. I told my son as the plane landed, I'm like, now, buddy, you know what's all over down here? He said, what, Dad? I said, this is Cowboys here. And so he was pretty upset about that because I've been clear from day one that we don't say Cowboys in our house. So we get off the plane and we go to Dunkin' Donuts to get some breakfast in Dallas Love Field Airport. And he says to the woman running the register, "Are you Cowboys?" And she said, "Yes, I am." She said, "And you're the bad guys." So I was pretty excited about that. He told me all he wanted to do the whole time we were here is convert all the Cowboys to Eagles. So I'm doing something right. Not a lot, but at least something's being done right as a parent.
I love it. I can support it all the way. All right. Well, listen, if you're checking in with us this week, it means one of two things. Well, either one, you're really into your fantasy football prep just as we are heading into this wide receiver edition of our rankings. Or two, you absolutely don't care about Game of Thrones because apparently it's the first night of Game of Thrones.
Those are both good options.
Yeah, either way, good for you.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't understand it. All these people are like, basically every team is like tweeting winter's coming and all this. Like, don't take my summer away from me. I don't care if it's Game of Thrones.
I don't even know what that means.
But
Not
anyway,
like it's Better Call Saul.
Right.
No. And we welcome all of the Game of Thrones defectors or haters or indifferent people as we talk this week about the wide receiver position. Last week we debated back and forth on the merits of the zero running back philosophy. And as we told you, it was a bust. I can tell you from experience if you really want to know even further detail. But even with that said,
hey, the two guys laughing didn't follow the zero RB last year. We played each other. Yeah, so
even with that said, we can't overlook the importance of the wide receiver position. The right mix to complement your running backs could help you cruise to a championship in fantasy football this season. So without further ado, let's get right into our rankings. We're going to break down the top five and discuss some of those guys right out of the gate here. Our top five, number one, we have Julio Jones. Number two, Antonio Brown. Number three, Odell Beckham. Number four, Mike Evans. And number five, Jordy Nelson. So to some degree, we all believe that the top three are the top three. Deal's not so sold on Julio Jones as number one, and the rest of the Goons appear to be that way at this point. So I'm just curious about the thought process that went in specifically for him, leaning away from that, but then also for everybody else, what makes you so confident in that?
Yeah, he won't be number one for me, no question. AB led the league the past 3 seasons. For me, there's no reason to think that's going to change. And OBJ had the second most fantasy points per game in 2015 and the most in 2014. Now, he did have a down year last year, but they had very little. The Giants had very little other than him. They had Rashawn Jennings. He had 593 rushing yards and led the team. Cruz and Shepard combined for a little over 1,200 yards, and that's about it total, like on their whole team. So I still see AB leading the way. Then Odell taking second back over because they're turning the ball over to Paul Perkins, who, in my opinion, you should be keeping your eye on. And in addition, they have B. Marsh now. They have Shepard having his rookie year out of the way, and I just feel like their offense is going to be back at least close to where it was before. So I don't see any way Julio breaks into either of those two positions for me.
See, to me, I look at this, not to make a joke right off the bat, but it's what I do. I really look at those top three as 1A, B, and C, and I'm gonna take that to the grave. No, because honestly, it's all a touchdown thing for me, and like touchdowns kind of come in ebbs and flows, but like Julio had more yardage than the other two, so you know what I mean. Like it's not a complete wash, but you know with less touchdowns. Now you know 1 or 2 more red zone targets, those touchdown numbers go up. You know, 1 or 2 less touchdowns for one of the other guys, you know, in a scenario, you know, especially with, you know, Odell, you know, now having Brandon Marshall there, that's a big red zone target. Martavius Bryant is back. That could mean less touchdown attempts for AB. And all three of these guys, I'm not saying anything bad about them. They're all still 1, 2, 3, no matter how you look at it.
Of course.
But I just look at them a much more even of a situation. If I was drafting in the late first round, and any of these three fell to me and like the top 6 or 7 backs already gone, any one of those guys is a slam dunk for me.
Yeah, I have Julio 1. Now, part of that is honestly just personal bias. I have Julio number 1 pretty much every year because I think he's the most talented wide receiver that we've ever seen. And at some point, the numbers are going to back that up. Now, for me, the touchdown thing is where it's always been shaky. And I agree, Rock, that with Martavis Bryant back – and Le'Veon Bell taking over the league like he did last year, listen, AB is still going to finish really high, but I got to knock him a little bit. But for me, the Julio thing, I have read that he was actually 6th on the Falcons in red zone targets last year, which is ridiculous. And one of Steve Sarkisian's big things was that he wants to give Julio more red zone targets. So if you're going to tell me a guy who's a top 5 receiver every single year is now going to get more red zone targets, yeah, I'm obviously pretty interested in that. So,
yeah, I'm going to just kind of fall in line with what you guys are saying. To me, it's as simple as which offense has not changed that drastically to this point. You know, you're adding Martavis Bryant back in for the Steelers, so there's a little bit of a big play threat there. And then with the Giants, something sneaky that nobody's really talking about, they drafted Evan Ingram. And the Giants are traditionally a team that wants to get the tight end a lot more involved in the game plan. And I think Eli's going to get Ingram involved as the season goes on, and he might start to steal away some of those red zone attempts or some of those red zone opportunities that otherwise I don't think a lot of other guys would. So it's kind of a riding the fence thing, almost like Rocco, where I just feel like he just goes a notch above based on the fact that by all accounts he should have an identical or better season than last year, and the other two guys might have a very minuscule drop, just enough to put him ahead for me. All right, so at number 4, we've got Mike Evans. He's unanimous there. And one of the things that I'm starting to worry about, I mean, maybe just a little personally, I want to see how you guys feel about this as well. Are we falling too in love with Mike Evans in Tampa Bay?
No.
I don't.
It's hard to fall too in love with such a target monster. Like, I mean, the one thing that makes me nervous about Evans with the addition of Deshaun Jackson is not the targets. It's that some of those drives are going to turn into one-play 73-yard drives, instead of the Bucks going 15 yards at a time, where Evans might lose targets just because there's fewer plays being run. But and listen, the addition of Howard, the addition of Jackson, I get it. But listen, this is like the anti-Carr to Cooper thing for me, where I bang on that because Carr just doesn't realize how good Cooper is. Jameis Winston definitely realizes how good Mike Evans is.
Yeah.
I heard a really interesting argument about this today, and it didn't change my opinion on Mike Evans at all, but it was actually a beat writer for Tampa Bay Tribune on XM radio today, talking about how, Mike Evans is exactly what we expect him to be. He single-handedly probably won Johnny Manziel the Heisman a couple of years ago. He's just such a good receiver. But what we see from his stat line right now might just be his ceiling, not because he's not good enough to get it, but because of the addition of Howard, the addition of Jackson, all those things, yes, that will open him up. But like Miles said, that might turn some drives into much shorter drives and not, 3 receptions for 60 yards and a touchdown for Evans, just because the drive's going to go quicker. So I think that 100 catch, 1,200 yard, 12 touchdown radius is exactly what we're going to get from Mike Evans, which I'm ecstatic about. But we might not see the true potential of Mike Evans ever rise past that because of the other weapons.
And ceiling's fine for me there because he was 2 last year, so it's not like his ceiling was 12. So yeah, I think
and even on the flip side, the floor is not far from that.
Right.
Barring injury, of course.
Sure.
Because he's going to get his targets.
Right. Yeah, and I think you also didn't mention Chris Godwin, who opens up the field a ton. He's going to be a really good receiver too. So they just have so many threats there. Tampa Bay is going to be good.
Yeah, see, great minds think alike, because I was actually sitting here thinking, man, no one's talking about Chris Godwin.
Yep.
He might be one of the biggest steals of this past draft.
Yep.
But I still think Cam Brate is a pretty good football player too at the tight end position.
He's
so
really good.
You're going to have 2 tight ends. There's a lot of mouths to feed in that offense. So I guess more than anything, I was just kind of taking a temperature around the room here to see if I was crazy to think this or if there was a little bit of legitimacy to it.
Yeah, you know what? And I still think it's kind of the same as Julio in Atlanta, where, there's a ton of mouths to feed there too. But your guy's your guy. Like, the stud is the stud.
Yep.
If you're asking me to compare Chris Godwin to, another receiver that's tough because there's a lot of mouths to feed. But I'm not going to talk about the mouths to feed argument with Julio and Mike Evans. I mean, because what he loses because of mouths to feed and targets, he's going to gain in catches and yards because the field's opened up.
Yeah,
so
he's not being double teamed.
It almost evens out. Like, he's not going to end with 173 targets again. But I won't be shocked at all if he takes 20 fewer targets and still has the same style on.
Right. Or better.
Right.
All right, so we round out the top 5 here, and sneaking in, I guess, to the top 5 is Jordy Nelson of the Packers. And this is interesting because the only person that actually voted him into the top 5 was Rocco at number 5. But more than anything, I think everybody else's rankings canceled out any other players from sneaking in there. So, Jordy Nelson, nobody's got him any lower than 6. Obviously, everybody respects him. I guess it's more interesting, the argument here for Jordy Nelson over AJ Green. So, what kind of goes into your thought process there with those 2 players as we kind of bleed into the next group?
I'll jump in first just because I have him ranked at 5th. More so than any wide receiver in football, the relationship between Jordy and his quarterback is absolutely incredible. Like, Aaron Rodgers is a different player when Jordy's on the field. And obviously, Jordy's, when he's on the field, is Aaron Rodgers' favorite target. Right. More than Julio and Matty Ice, and more than AB and Ben Roethlisberger, more than Evans and Freeman. Like, that is Rodgers' guy. So, the fact that I only have him at 5 is really just from a talent standpoint. I think the other 4 are more talented than Jordy, but that relationship he has with Rodgers is second to none in the NFL.
Yeah.
I actually think the Nelson Green conversation, for me, is even closer than the Julio AB Odell thing. I mean, it's really what you're looking for as you draft your team. I think Jordy's the more sure thing, but AJ's, of the 2 of them, I think AJ's more likely to end the year as the top receiver. So, that's why I have AJ at 5. He's got some injury issues. Jordy had 1 year, but for the most part, he's been healthy, and his connection with Rodgers tells me I definitely know what I'm getting. But AJ Green could have 1,800 yards and 15 touchdowns this year. Yep. I mean, it could happen.
Yeah, I have Jordy ahead of him because A-Rod's throwing him the ball. So it's not as much an AJ versus Jordy debate for me as it is a Rodgers versus Red Rocket debate. And I'm going to side with Rodgers there. So it's close. It's close.
I'm not. Can I tell you I'm not?
Stop it. South, mute him, quick. We don't want to hear it. We don't want to hear it.
Listen, obviously, as a quarterback argument, right. I mean, A-Rod way over Dalton. But for me, that actually knocks Jordy in my book because Rodgers is going to go the right place with the ball every time. And sometimes that's Cobb. Sometimes it's Adams.
Not that much.
It's often Jordy, but it's some of those other players. Andy Dalton's going to panic and just, where's AJ? To my left. Woo! And throw it over to the left. And, he can be triple covered, but Andy's like, I'm not going to throw it to Tyler Boyd. So, I mean, I actually think a quarterback like Dalton helps AJ Green because he's not good enough to throw it in tiny windows to other players. He's good enough to throw it high to AJ Green.
But A-Rod still does throw Jordy the ball about 150 times. So that's
right.
a lot. That's a lot.
Again, 5'6". I'm not arguing AJ versus Randall Cobb here.
Right.
Yeah, it kind of ends up being the same exact thing for me, honestly. Like I'm just kind of ranking him based on, I think that we know Jordy's ceiling. I think AJ's ceiling could be higher, so I kind of sneak him ahead. But if you want the more sure thing, the guy who's pretty much a lock for double-digit touchdowns, then I think that you would go with Jordy Nelson at that point.
Right.
All right, let's get into our number 6 through 10 guys here. I think this is where things are going to start to heat up for us. If you're watching and listening right now, you're probably wondering why it's taken us so long to argue and disagree. And I think that this is the hot zone right here. All right, so number 6, we've got AJ Green, followed by T.Y. Hilton, Dez Bryant, Michael Thomas, and Amari Cooper, rounding out our 6 through 10 range here. First thing I'm going to ask before we really get too heated here, if you had to pick one of these guys that you would be least surprised to see a top 3 finish from, who are you going with?
AJ. He's the most complete receiver, but I wouldn't be surprised with any of these guys, honestly, not even a little bit. They all play on good offenses, and they're all really good receivers. I hope it's T.Y., though.
Yeah. But honestly, he would – I mean, I think across the board we got to say AJ, but yeah. T.Y. would be my second.
Yeah.
Because the same argument, Andy loves to throw the ball.
Yep.
His targets are all over the place. Dez is an injury risk. Michael Thomas is a second-year player, and Carr hates Cooper.
I see. I'm gonna go the other way. I'm actually gonna say that I think it's Ty, and I mean he just led the league in receiving yards. So once again, this goes back to a touchdown argument for me. If the touchdowns are there, which with an improved line they really should be, okay. But if the touchdowns are there,
what improved line?
They got.
It's not a thing.
They got what? That's not a thing in Indianapolis?
It's not a thing for them. It's still bad.
It is improved.
But go ahead.
It's somewhat improved. All right. But no, yeah. T.Y. just finished the last year leading in receiving yards. So if the touchdowns get there, then he's the lock to jump up into the top 3 because he's already somewhat there. You know what I mean? Right. He's got to have more. He's definitely got to turn more of those into touchdowns for sure. But if he hits double-digit touchdowns, he's in the top 3.
Oh, my goodness, yeah. Because there's no reason to think his yardage is going down.
No, not at all.
I mean, so if he can put up 4 more touchdowns than he did last year, I wouldn't be surprised at all. He's actually a big target of mine. I think the reason I won't own him much is he's going to be drafted right around the same time as A.J. Green, and I'll take Green.
All right, so – let's get into it here because this is where things are going to get interesting. Internally, we've got this debate going here between T.Y. Hilton and Dez Bryant. And I'm going to throw this out there first to Rocco because he's got Dez Bryant at number 11 in his rankings. So why all the hate for Dez at this point?
Maz, you could shake your head all you want. You could shake it right to the bank. I don't care. No, but my big thing with Dez is kind of your big thing with Amari Cooper. Dak just seems to ignore him for huge portions of the game. I mean, last year he had his worst statistical season of any year that he started at least 13 games. So take out the injury year and his rookie year, and it wasn't even close, really. It was 250 less yards, 3 less touchdowns than his previous low. They are extremely run-dependent with Zeke, and they don't want Dak to make mistakes. So unless you're going to tell me that Dak's whole philosophy on life is going to change, which I had this conversation with South before we started, Dak Prescott, to me, is going to wind up having a very Mark Sanchez-esque career. When that running game goes,
wow,
so does Dak. But yeah, he seems to forget that Des Bryant is the best receiver in that receiving core. I'm much higher on Cole Beasley than I am on Des Bryant. And that's I'm not saying Cole Beasley is going to be in this conversation, but what I'm saying is like the Dallas Cowboy receiver I would rather own is Cole Beasley because you're going to get him 20 rounds later.
Stop it.
Write that down. Write that down.
Yeah,
Write it down.
I'm 50% baffled because of what you're saying, and the other 50% is I'm just mad because I've heard Cole Beasley on the radio all week talking about, hey, I'm Cole Beasley from America's favorite team. But some of the words you say, I'm just not sure.
Obviously, I don't mean that, but the whole fact remains is that Dez for me is got to be bumped down because. They're getting away from throwing the ball, and two, when they are throwing it, he's like the opposite of AJ Green. His quarterback is not forcing him the ball when he probably should be. So for me, the lack of production last year, the fact that they're extremely run heavy right now, and then the rise of some of these other young guys, Dez is taking a backseat for me.
All right, so for the level-headed people in the room. All right, so Rocco,
that's right.
You can take a timeout for a second here. All right.
That's right. Hey, where did Dez finish last year? Does anybody know?
Why all the love for T.Y. Hilton over Dez? I guess what is interesting to me.
Let me tell you.
T.Y. Hilton had 1,400 yards receiving last year, and Dez Bryant had 7.
Okay.
100.
Just 7.
That's
Just
7.
He had 7 yards.
Like. If this was anyone other than Dez Bryant and the name Dez Bryant and the fact that he's a Cowboy, nobody in their right minds would compare those two after the seasons they had last year.
You're in a timeout.
Fine. I'm in timeout then.
I feel like go ahead, Neil.
This is derailed. This is derailed.
Big time.
I'll try to get us back here by telling you it's T.Y. because he's the ghost. Does that get us back? He's the ghost. Last season, he went 91 for 14, 48, and 6 touchdowns. He led the league in yards. So that was with Moncrief out a lot. So more double teams. Andy had a jacked up shoulder. Andy and Moncrief will be healthy this year, assumedly. And I like him to stay similar in yardage. No reason really to think he's going to drop off there. I like him for around 100 receptions again, but I like him to score at least 2 more times. So I think that he probably will go for double digits. I think he'll go at least 10 touchdowns. And he was number 5 last season. So why would I think he was going to drop from there? Because there's no reason his numbers would drop.
Yeah, it's T.Y. over Dez for sure, but I'm higher on Dez, obviously, than Rocco. I think a big reason for that is it's very difficult. It's actually one of the tougher things in fantasy football to take a quarterback from year 1 to year 2 and know what he's going to do. I mean, there were games last year where Dez was heavily targeted and he ate up. I mean, he did major damage when Dak gave him those opportunities. So it's hard for me to sit here and say that Dak, after this offseason of watching what Dez is really capable of doing and having a full offseason to get himself more immersed in the offense, et cetera, that he won't have those games a little more often. Now, yes, obviously Dallas is still going to run the ball like crazy, and why wouldn't you?
Right.
I just, for me, it's a potential thing with Dez too, where if I'm looking at him, I'll go bump one down on our list with Michael Thomas. Who do I trust more? Dez to put up what he's capable of, or Michael Thomas to repeat what was half a fluky rookie year. I'd rather have Dez. So listen, I'm not putting him up there with Evans and these guys, but I trust him a little more for sure to upgrade. I mean, to tell me with his skill set and with Dak getting a full offseason and another year in the offense, you're telling me you don't think he can put up another 300 yards and a couple more touchdowns to put him as a top 10 receiver? That's ludicrous to think that he can't. Now, will he? I don't know. And I could tell you right now, we won't find out on any of my teams because I'm just not going to draft him. But I think it's very possible.
Do you think Cole Beasley will?
I do not.
Oh, okay.
I think that was probably the most shocking thing to me was that he was outside of the top 10, which, you know, if you feel that strongly about it, then fine. I mean, by all accounts, go for it because you're going to look like a genius if it happens. So,
Right.
I mean, you know, why not if you feel strongly about it? And I'm taking a lot of heat this week because I've actually got Des Bryant above T.Y. Hilton and above, you know, basically everybody in this category except for A.J. Green. And I am the well-known Cowboy hater, so I'm taking a lot of slack for this. And I'll take it, but I think that honestly what this comes down to, the biggest thing is that the last 2 seasons for Dez, he was playing on a bad foot. And I think that's really understated for the kind of player that Dez needs to be. I think you saw in the second half of last year, he kind of got back to a little bit more of his normal form, so to speak. He started, you know, instead of catching the ball and getting out of bounds or catching the ball and getting down, he started trying to engage tacklers and trying to run guys over again. And he just looked a little bit more like himself. So by all accounts, you know, we're hearing that he's going to be fully healthy again. And yes, he's got an injury history. So, you know, that's not just going to go away. Another argument to be made is that Dak last year, he really just kind of went with his first read. And if the first read wasn't there, it was just take off or whatever. So he's got to open up his knowledge of the playbook, his ability to quarterback the team a little bit more to get Dez involved. But I think that's going to happen. The biggest thing for me, since 2012, Dez is plus 22 touchdowns on T.Y. Hilton. I love T.Y. Hilton. He's going to put up a boatload of yards. It's going to be a yards bonanza with T.Y. Hilton. There's no doubt about that. I just don't think he's ever going to be that guy that really gets into the end zone that consistently. I think Dez could get back to that double-digit touchdown area where he has kind of lived previously a lot more easily than T.Y. Hilton getting there.
I think my only argument I have for that, just to wrap this specific point up, is like I can't even look at that the same. The fact that he's out has that many more touchdowns than Ty, just because that quarterback that was throwing him the ball is not there anymore. The Tony Romo to Des Bryant connection, hopefully, fingers crossed, is something we'll never have to hear again. You know what I mean? And the current quarterback that's there is not, is not targeting him the same way. Like I'm not saying this to be a jerk, but Cole Beasley was out targeted Des Bryant last year. Like that's insane. And I'm not saying that like that's okay with me. It's wrong, but it's the way that they were running their team.
All right. Well, listen, we got to wrap up this pocket of players here, but just real quickly in 10 to 15 seconds, if you've got to name one player from this group who is most likely to ghost, and not Deal's version of ghost, but our usual goon and ghost version, who's most likely to just kind of fall off the face of the planet this year, give me one name and a real quick reason why.
I got Dez. I got Dez because he hasn't been relevant since 2014. That's a long time ago, and I know it's because of a foot injury. But why all of a sudden do we think an injury that was lasting 2 years isn't going to last 3 years? And we still collectively aren't sold on Dak, to say the least. So there's no reason that it shouldn't be Dez.
Yeah, I think that is the easy answer of these five. I mean, barring injury, it's not AJ. I mean, T.Y. Hilton, the Colts aren't going to throw the ball less. You know what I mean? And he didn't get slower. Michael Thomas, as much as I have my doubts, he is on an offense where he's the number one target, and the quarterback's going to throw for 5,000 yards.
Right.
And Amari Cooper's really, really good. So, I mean, even if Carr doesn't give him the ball that much, he does too much with it. Dez is the answer here. But I like all five of these. I'm not going to bang on any of them.
Sorry, Cowboys fans. It's Dez. I already gave you all my answers.
I think we could have surmised that from your previous comments before, but I actually agree that it's Dez. I think that it's boom or bust for him this year. Like there's really not going to be any in between. But somebody that I'm really watching out for too is Amari Cooper. I think the Raiders are going to try and run the ball a little bit more. So I think in a roundabout way that's going to hurt him. And especially on a team where already when they get in the red zone, all of a sudden Michael Crabtree is like the greatest thing since sliced bread again. there could be issues there for Cooper when it comes to his touchdown total. So I think that could push him in that direction. All right, let's talk about our number 11 through 15 guys as we try and kind of kick this into a little bit of a different gear here. We've got DeAndre Hopkins, Allen Robinson, Alshon Jeffrey, Doug Baldwin, and Brandon Cooks. This is where we start to get a little bit more deviation. And for those that have not been following, our deviation is the difference in where we have our guys ranked. So we have 2 points on Doug Baldwin and 2.4 on Brandon Cooks. So Brandon Cooks has been one of the hot names of this offseason. Do we think that he is hurt at all by Julian Edelman, or is he going to be able to put up numbers that we're becoming used to from him?
I think it depends on your expectation of him. You know, I think where we have him collectively at 15 is probably about right because, listen, Edelman was third in the league last year in targets. That's not going to change. You know, assuming, which you can't assume, but assuming Gronk is healthy, he's absolutely going to get his. You know, and when you're talking about Cooks, where we all now have 3 guys that we're drafting as fantasy all-the-time starters from the same passing offense, that is too many major mouths to feed. You know, so I don't think the targets are going to be there the way they were in New Orleans. However, the player is incredible. So I think he's going to take limited targets and turn them into production. But I think squarely as a receiver, too, I feel pretty comfortable with that. When people are going to draft him as a receiver 1 is where I'm uncomfortable because I don't think he's going to have the opportunities. I mean, you look at the names that we've talked about already, they are the clear-cut, absolute number 1 guy on their team, every single one of them, except for maybe Cooper. But I think we can agree he overcomes that by being arguably the second or third most talented player in the league at receiver. But for me, with Cooks, you know, he's going to put up numbers because he's going to get behind defenses. I just don't think the target share is there for receiver 1. Edelman's going to out-target him, but I do still think Cook should be ranked ahead of Edelman because of his ability to do crazy things with the ball in his hand. So I think we have him right, but people that have him a little higher than that could be suffering.
Yeah, so I'm interested though because Rocco has him as his number 10 guy right now. So I'm kind of wondering what goes into the thought process there.
My thought process here is very, very simple. One, it has way more to do with Tom than it has to do with the player itself. That being said, you know, we're probably looking at, you know, 550 to 600 targets for Tom Brady, and that's being conservative, I think. So I think the target share is absolutely there for both guys. Edelman is Tom's security blanket for all, you know, intents and purposes. Like, that is his safety valve. It's his check down guy. It's his slot guy. But the guy that he's going to be throwing the deep ball to, the guy that he's going to be taking his chances with is going to be Cooks because of the skill set. So, yes, I'm not doubting that Edelman's going to have more targets than him. But I think they could actually wind up with very similar yardage, and then the touchdowns are absolutely going to be there, probably for both, but definitely for Cooks. So, for me, I'm going to take the chance on the guy that is going to absolutely blow the top off of the defenses for them. I said this in a much earlier podcast, similar, and I'm not saying he is, but similar to the way they use Randy Moss. And I don't think that Cooks is going to be 23 touchdowns, but I think absolutely they're going to use his speed and physicality, even though he's a little bit of a shorter receiver, they're going to use that speed and physicality as just a nightmare mismatch on the outside. And then that's, you know, Tom Brady, my quarterback, throwing to Brandon Cooks, I'm taking that to the bank all day long.
Yeah, I don't think it's that wild of a thing to say that they're going to give him a similar role to what they did with Randy Moss. Obviously, he's not physically the same guy, but when you have all those other options underneath, it's going to be hard to really overprotect on him, I guess. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I'm probably a little bit more reserved on it, but I do agree that it's going to be interesting to see how he kind of fits in as that deep role on that Pats team.
Yeah, my big nervousness, just one more thing on it. You know, Rock, you said the touchdowns will be there for both of them. Edelman only had 3 last year. My thing with the Pats is Brady doesn't target his receivers for touchdowns. Over half of his passing touchdowns last year were to running backs and tight ends. So when they get down there, he's just not going to target these guys.
Well, and I understand your point 100%, but in fairness, outside of Julian Edelman, the receivers last year were, you know what I mean? Like they didn't have them. You know, you're throwing it like Malcolm Mitchell wound up being a very good complementary type player for them, but it's Malcolm Mitchell. Sorry, I know he went to Georgia, but like, you know what I mean? Like you have not had another talent on the field like Brandon Cooks probably since you had Randy Moss and Julian Edelman. Yeah. You know what I mean? So for me, like, yes, I understand your point there, but the other point is they don't have the talented wide receivers outside of Edelman to do that.
It's a new toy. It's a new toy, and it has to be pretty nice.
Everybody loves playing with a new toy.
Yeah, especially that kind.
Yeah, it could be a scary situation if that works out as well as it potentially could in New England. Just real quickly here, as we kind of roll through this group of players, I'm looking at Doug Baldwin. Does Doug Baldwin get overlooked as a wide receiver, especially in fantasy, just because of, you know, the image that we have of the Seahawks as being kind of like a ground and pound team, or am I just making this up?
I think I saw this. You know what? I should have double checked it, but I believe he's one of only 3 players that finished top 10 at receiver the past 2 years. It's Odell, Antonio Brown, and Doug Baldwin. 2 straight years of top 10 finishes at wide receiver. Yes. So I mean, he's absolutely overlooked, being 14th to an extent because he's outperformed it 2 consecutive years, and nothing Seattle has done leads me to believe that that's going to change. It's not like they picked up Mike Evans in free agency. I mean, Baldwin is still the man.
Right.
So I guess he's overlooked because he's outperformed it, but they are still what they are. I mean, Seattle's going to run the ball. Russ is going to run it more than he did last year because we've talked about the injuries he had in 2016 already. They now have 3 running backs that they're ready to give the ball to. So I think, I just think he's where he should be, even though he's outperformed it 2 consecutive years. So I guess what I'd say is I like where we have him ranked, but if you're going to pick in this group, don't overlook him then, come draft time.
I think
he should definitely be drafted ahead of Brandon Cooks.
No. Well, you're wrong. Well, you're wrong there, but whatever. No, the thing with Baldwin is, and I hate to say this, but he's just – he does get overlooked because he's not flashy and he's quiet and he just goes out there and does his job. But for the past 3 seasons, since he's been, essentially their number 1 wide receiver, targets are going up every year, catches are going up every year, yardage is going up every year. Touchdowns, we talk about all the time how it comes and goes. He went from 3 to 14 back down to 7. 7 right now is 7 to 10 right now is probably the more realistic situation for him. But if we're going to get the same targets, the same catches, and the same yardage, 10 touchdowns makes him a top 10 wide receiver again this year. So, he's one of those guys that he kind of sneakily, comes into the top 10 and you don't think about him. And maybe it's because he's quiet. Maybe it's because he's not a quote unquote diva and he's not, he's not giving us anything to look at him off the field. So, he's just Doug Baldwin.
I love Doug Baldwin, man. I need to move this guy up. He's had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. He had 14 scores 2 years ago, 7 last year. I like him to be somewhere in the middle there, 9, 10 touchdowns, 8 or 9 touchdowns, 10 wouldn't be shocked. And he has an offense that I think is going to be passing the ball more than expected. And I like Baldwin to have a nice season. So, yeah, I do think he does get somewhat overlooked.
I got to say, this is a scary situation because this is like the 3rd time that I'm going to agree with everything that Rocco said. And to top it off, I actually supported Des Bryant as a top-tier wide receiver this year.
You're having a rough night.
Is something wrong with me?
You feel
You're giving in to your rivals.
I'm a little warm. I don't know. Maybe something is wrong with me here, but
you got that Zika.
Maybe you need to shake the dust off your boots.
Maybe I do. Miles knows all about that though, so we'll leave that to him. All right, so just round out this discussion real quick here. If you go running back heavy at the top of your draft, which I think a lot of people, especially the guys in this room, are most likely going to do this season, and you mix in maybe a quarterback in those top couple rounds, are you okay with having one of these guys in this group right here as your wide receiver 1 to ride all season long?
Absolutely.
I mean,
yes.
Is there a
Yes and
specific
no.
guy?
For me?
Yeah, for anybody.
No, not for me. I like any of these guys. I'm okay with any of them being my number one, and I 100% believe that in pretty much all my leagues, one of these guys will be my number one receiver. So yes, I feel confident in it.
Here, I'm gonna put an asterisk next to that. I say yes, but one of these guys has to be my number 2 receiver also. So, like, if I go running back heavy in the first 2 or 3 rounds, my next 2 picks are hopefully going to be guys from that group. Maybe 11 and 15. You know what I mean? Or I can't expect to get 11 and 12, but 11 and 15.
So
and then I'm okay.
You wouldn't be okay with Cooks, Demaryius Thomas, and Jarvis Landry being your receivers?
If it played out exactly like that, then obviously I'd be okay with that.
That's higher likely.
But realistically, if you told me that I was going to wind up with Cooks and then Pryor and Larry Fitzgerald, and we'll get into why we're picking those guys specifically, I'm a lot less enthused by that. Miles, I see you shaking your head. You want to jump on?
I'm out. I need to have one of those top 10. I've always been that way. I'm a running back heavy guy, just like we've talked about. But I always end up trading for one of those top guys. And I think this is the year. I've been clear with this already. I like the later running backs enough to just go ahead and draft one of these top guys. I'm certainly not going to do, the 2016 South and take 2 of them, but I'll take one.
Yeah, I'm okay with it, honestly, as long as it's not Allen Robinson. I'm just a little bit scared about that situation down there in Jacksonville. I think that is an offense that is going to transition to a run-first approach starting right away this year, honestly. So I think it's going to hurt him a little bit. I think he drops off just enough that I don't have the confidence in him all season long. But any of these other guys, and even a handful from the next group we're going to talk about, I think I'd be okay with it. So, it's a deep.
For me, it'd have to be Doug. It'd have to be Doug, because he's the only one in that group that doesn't have major question marks to me. How's Cook's going to be used? I don't know. Can Hopkins have any quarterback play? I don't know. Is Robinson going to make things happen? I don't know. Can Alshon Jeffrey stay healthy? I don't know. So it'd be Doug. I'd be okay with Doug probably.
All right. Hey, let's move into our number 16 through 20 guys here. This tends to be a group that can bust big time or make a significant jump up the board. So, this is a lot of risk reward in here. We've got Demaryius Thomas, Jarvis Landry, Devontae Adams, Terrell Pryor, Larry Fitzgerald, rounding out our collective top 20 here. Devontae Adams has a 2.3 deviation. I know we had some interesting conversation just internally during the week on him. We've got him as high as number 14 to me. Deal and Rocco have him down at number 20. So, let's jump into it here a little bit with Devontae Adams, because he was a polarizing player for us as we got ready for this podcast. So let's go with Deal and Rocco, because I'm already talking a lot as host here. So, what's the thought process at 20?
I'm so sad we're talking about him again. We talked about a middle-ranked wide receiver for 4 hours the other day.
I'll just jump in. Like, if for our listeners out there, my biggest argument with Adams is that he's just so touchdown dependent. He hasn't hit 1,000 yards receiving yet. The targets are there, but I look for a big drop with adding Bennett and
Can I jump in real quick?
Oh.
This is the second guy in the past 2 weeks that you've banged on for not being a 1,000-yard player that had 997.
Yes.
Is that 1,000 yards?
It's not, but you can't use it again. Like, you can't get 1,000. Like, if he fell forward one more time.
Wait, time out.
It's not like he was an 8-10 player.
Remind me. Did he get 1,000?
No, he didn't. But you can't use it as he's not a good player because he can only get 9.
Okay.
All
right, fine.
He fell backwards one time. He
had a very good year at 997. All right.
There you go.
He's extremely touchdown dependent is my point here. Okay, because he didn't get to the 1,000-yard benchmark, which is what we look for in a wide receiver. He's right there on the cusp. I'll give it to you. But listen, if some okay, this is my favorite stat. This is my favorite stat. He had 12 touchdowns last year. 9 of those came in the red zone. Okay, he's got 16 touchdowns on his career. 12 of those are in the red zone.
It's a good thing he plays on an offense who's in the red zone a lot, and a quarterback who threw 40 touchdown passes last year.
Went out and got probably the best red zone target that they're going to have on their team this year, Martellus Bennett. And I look for him to take some of those away. Okay, that's my biggest point. If his stat line, as it is right now, without the double-digit touchdowns, is not good enough to be in that group.
Okay, and T.Y. Hilton, if he only had 850 yards, he's not good enough to be in his group. But it happened. Rocco, we're not talking about a Jet being touchdown dependent. This is a Green Bay Packer. It's okay to be touchdown dependent on a team that scores like 4 touchdowns a game.
You can't add a red zone weapon like Martellus Bennett and not expect it to affect their best red zone weapon from last year. Like
how about the fact that he's increased by 30 targets every year of his career so far, and he's increased 12 catches, and then he increased 25 catches, and he increased a little bit of yards, and then 500 more yards. You're completely ignoring this guy's progression as a player, and you're acting like last year's catches and yards are a ceiling. I can agree with you that 12 is probably a pretty high ceiling for this guy. Like, if he gets 12 again, I'll be a little surprised. But I'll also be shocked if he's under 9. But I'll be surprised if he's not an 80-catch, 1,100-yard kind of guy. I mean, why are you expecting the catches and yards, which all 3 of his years have increased exponentially, to now all of a sudden decrease just because you like Martellus Bennett?
Well, I kind of went into depth of this the other day, and obviously we disagree with the number of targets.
4 hours.
Which we talked about the number of targets, which is huge. But if you just take conservatively his averages and give him 100 targets,
you can't take his averages because he's not a player that's reached his average yet. He's not plateaued.
But that's such a silly thing to say that you can't take his averages.
It's like telling me Derrick Henry is going to average 400 yards rushing every year because that's what he's done.
Yeah, look, I'm gonna jump in here because I feel like we can kind of go back and forth, but here's the thing: we talk all the time, and people talk all the time about these wide receivers when they hit that 3rd year. That's really when they get to the point where you can start to accurately measure what they're doing. Davante Adams last year in his 3rd year, having a full grasp now of the offense, being utilized fully, had his best season to date. And, Rocky, you were all over Doug Baldwin because he had that natural progression of targets, receptions, yards. The touchdowns for Doug Baldwin, you said were all over the place, whatever. I get it that they're even more all over the place with Davante Adams, but Miles makes a good point. Like, this is a high-volume offense. They're going to score a lot of points. Like, we're not talking about like a number 15 or 16 scoring offense in the league. We're talking 1 through 3, with 3 being like the worst probably. So we talked about this the other day too. You're getting 600 plus pass attempts. So there's a ton of action to go around. I just don't see that there's going to be that significant of a dip. And his upside as a physical player and talented player is, it's just like we talked about with A.J. Green. The ceiling is a lot higher than what people want to give him credit for, I think.
I think my biggest thing here is, and I'll kind of leave it with this, if he winds up with the exact same number of targets as last year, which 121 is high, so let's not pretend like it's not. It could absolutely happen. But based on the trends of his career, I'll say, and we got 3 sample years, each one getting a little bit more and a little bit more. But and this is the argument we had the other day, he's not going to catch 70% of his balls. So if he doesn't catch 70% of his balls, he's not hitting 95 catches. So that 75 for just around 1,000 is where I could see him winding up again potentially. But the touchdown number is, for me, 12 is too unrealistic to ever ask for a guy to do back-to-back years unless you're a top 2 wide receiver or 3 wide receiver, which he's not. He's not even this is like the craziest part. He's not even the number 1 wide receiver on his team.
which I think greatly benefits him.
Okay, and now you're talking about adding another red zone target in there who, yes, I am very high on Martellus Bennett, but rightfully so, I think, given his skill set. So now you're going to tell me that he's going to be possibly, at least when he gets down to the red zone, the third look. I just don't see him getting anywhere near those touchdown numbers again.
All right, so listen, we've agreed a couple times tonight, which is weird, and now I'm also going to.
We need to have a Devontae Adams only edition.
Yes, we're going to have for subscribers, you're going to get a Devontae any pot.
I'm out.
So listen, that 4 hours the other day, that's just a warm up for one of our production meetings. So that's nothing new.
That's true.
Not only have we agreed 3 times, but I'm giving you the last word there.
Thank you.
Which you always complain I never give you the last word.
I never get it.
And I'm giving it to you, even though you're wrong.
Well, let's stop talking.
Even though you're wrong.
4 hours.
All right, listen, we're going to leave it at the top 20 for right now because we did promise our listeners that we are going to answer some of your questions. But 15 to 20 seconds, give me a player that we did not talk about in the top 20 that you believe we should have as a top 20 fantasy wide receiver this year.
I'm actually satisfied. The top 20 guys we have composite are my top 20 guys. So if I had to choose one, I got to choose Crabtree. He was 12 last year. He was 14th in 2015. He's been really good on a really good offense. So we're definitely snubbing him here.
Deal, you stole my guy. So I'll pick
Should
somebody.
Be everybody's guy.
He really should be.
I'm
gonna go out on a limb here. And go against my better judgment, just because from a talent standpoint, I think this guy is absolutely incredible, and that's Sammy Watkins. I mean, if he can just stay healthy.
After spending an hour crushing Tyrod Taylor, you're going to throw his receiver.
I know. Well, no, because Sammy's putting up decent numbers and can't stay healthy. If he can just stay healthy for 16 games, which I know is a stretch, he's absolutely a top 20 wide receiver. He just is, even with Tyrod.
I think if you're going to go that argument with it, you have to say Keenan Allen. Because if Keenan Allen could play 16 with the Chargers offense, he's easily top 10. But again, he can't. My guy would actually be the guy I'll be least surprised. It would be Dante Moncrief, because he's definitely the number 2 target in a high octane offense. And he has shown to love him when he's in there. So the touchdown numbers are absolutely going to be there.
Yeah.
So I won't be surprised at all if Moncrief squeezes as a WR2.
I love it.
All right. I'm just giving you a cop-out because the top 20, just like Deal, was 20. So, I'm going to leave it at that. And, I'll just throw it out there, Julian Edelman, only because we had him 21, so it's a total cop-out on my part. So, whatever. All right. Let's get into some of these questions here. We promised you guys out there that we would answer a few questions this week. And actually, we have our new contest that we're running, which is the question of the week. So we get together, have a little powwow, decide on which question we believe is most relevant to the topic, gives us the most interest in answering, questions, just makes us happy to answer, basically. There's really no fancy criteria to it. And when we pick you as the question of the week, we're going to send you out a free Football Goons t-shirt. So this week, our question of the week is going to Derek, who chimed in on Facebook. Wants to know which wide receivers could he target mid to late rounds in a PPR draft? And then also additionally wants to know just general thoughts. Is this a deep wide receiver pool overall, in your opinion? And how does that affect drafting this year?
Yeah, I think, I'll address his second question first. I think it's insanely deep. Just like most years, it feels insanely deep. I mean, you do get that kind of 20 to 40 range where you just don't know what to do with all these guys, but they're all very fantasy viable. So you got to kind of follow who you trust the most. And I appreciate, since he said PPR specifically, I mean, you got guys in our consensus 30s like Jamison Crowder, Stephon Diggs, Golden Tate's a huge one in a PPR, where these guys are going to eat up every week. Now they're low in pre-rankings because you're talking about players that have very limited chance of double-digit touchdowns. They're not 1,400-yard kind of guys. you're going to be surprised if any of the three guys I just mentioned gets 100 catches. I mean, it's very, very possible. So I think in a PPR, those are the kind of guys where, especially if you got that huge ceiling player like an AJ Green early on, I would fill in the rest of my receiving core with kind of really, really high floor guys, where Golden Tate's probably not going to have a whole lot of 2-catch for 19-yard games. It's just unlikely to happen. So those are the kind of guys in a PPR where I'm excited about. And even all the way down to Deals boy, Adam Thielen in Minnesota,
Love Adam Thielen.
Dude, he puts in some work. So there's actually a lot of guys in a PPR that I like, as long as you understand that the ceiling of 1,400 yards and 12 touchdowns is really unlikely.
I'll chime in. I love Jeremy Maclin there. We have him ranked 40th. I personally have him 35. Yahoo right now has him 57. And his new quarterback, threw the ball 672 times last year. He's the number one receiver on a team where his quarterback threw 672 times last season. South, I heard that volume is king.
Volume is king.
So that's a lot of volume, in my opinion. And Jeremy Maclin, if he's healthy this year, is a very good receiver. So I love that target down there.
I want to throw Martavius Bryant's name out there just in case he ever squashes his beef with Ben Roethlisberger, because when he's on the field with them, he is a touchdown threat. He's so good. But I in a PPR setting, that might not be a reach I would go to, because he's going to get you he's going to have like a 2-catch, 40-yard, 1 touchdown line. Right. You know what I mean? Like one of them is going to be a 135-yard touchdown. So I wouldn't really look at him in a PPR setting. I love Adam Thielen in that setting. But one guy I would absolutely look at is Corey Coleman. Somebody's got to emerge as the number 1 wide receiver there. And as of right now, I think he has a really good chance to. I don't look at them really being, ahead in a whole lot of games. So they're going to be throwing the ball. Although we all agree that the Browns are going to be better this year than last year, I still think that they're going to be playing from behind a good bit. So that could be a PPR glory find if you can. And then just because I want to throw him out there, because we don't talk about Jets on this podcast, I'm going to throw out my boy Quincy Enunwa, just because they like to play him in a slot type, H-back receiver role, and they don't have anyone else to throw to. So that means a lot of targets for Quincy.
Hey, can I back up this question a little bit on a guy that we actually even internally haven't discussed much? What are you guys' thoughts on Pierre Garçon? Like Shanahan's really – he's shown a huge tendency to give his number 1 receiver – there you go. Is that your answer? He gives the guy targets. His number 1 receiver gets targets. And Garçon is not a great player, but I guess South likes him.
He's a good player.
It's funny that you bring it up.
I'm saying he's not amazing, but he's certainly a solid player.
Yeah, look, it's funny that you bring it up, because I'm jumping in on Pierre Garçon. We have him as the number 45 guy collectively. So obviously it's a little bit of a deeper pick, but this seems to be what you're looking for, as a guy later on.
One pick after Thielen.
Right, who you could potentially steal, who gives you a lot more production than what you basically had to pay for him. So he's a guy who's had 105 plus targets the past 4 seasons, obviously in a little bit of a different setting, but you've got to believe that offense, for the most part, and that philosophy is going to roll into San Francisco. The talent level won't be the same as benefit, because they're going to struggle. They're going to need a guy that they have to lean on. So I think he's going to get a ton of targets. I think that he's a guy who, even though he's in the twilight of his career, he can cash in on those targets and be effective for you in a PPR format. I just wouldn't be counting on a whole boatload of touchdowns out of him, to be honest. So, but it's funny you should mention Pierre Garçon. All right, let's try and do one more question here, and I'm kind of throwing Rocco a bone on this one. All right, Jonathan chimes in on Facebook and wants to know which former Jets wide receiver is going to have a better 2017 season.
Wayne Corbett.
Marshall or Decker? And I will allow Corbett as an answer.
It's got to be Wayne Grabet. If he can just get over the concussions. I mean, no. This is actually a really difficult question for me to answer.
Really, I don't think it's tough at all.
Yeah. See, I have no idea. Put it this way: we're at the point in their careers where I trust Mariota more than I trust Eli. But Marshall is such a big red zone target that, I could see Decker out catching and out yardaging Marshall, and Marshall still being right there at points because he has 4 more touchdowns. You know what I mean? So, it's a really tough question. Gun to my head, I'd probably say Brandon Marshall.
Wow. I think it's Decker, and it's not close. And maybe that's a little bit of hatred coming out, but he's in a much better offense. He's definitely the number one guy there. Like you're saying, he's a big red zone target with Marshall, which is absolutely true. Odell is not a big red zone target and still gets a ton of red zone looks. Like, he's just that good.
Yeah.
No one cares how tall he is. He's that good because he can jump over you and essentially extend his index finger and catch the ball. So I don't see Marshall as a big difference maker with the Giants. I think Decker is a huge difference maker in Tennessee. So,
and I'll throw this out there, not to add a second point. I don't know what Eric Decker we're going to get.
Right.
This is second straight season coming off of an injury. He's above 30 years old. That surprisingly, that receiving group is pretty deep. They're like 4 or 5 guys that Mariota likes to throw to. They just drafted Corey Davis. They have another young rookie on his way up.
Taylor.
Yep, thank you. On top of Rashard Matthews, on top of Delaney Walker, on top of the fact that they run the ball 400 times.
Right.
There's so many variables there that I think the likelihood that Marshall gets like 600 yards and 8 touchdowns is much more likely for me, and then that's going to outperform Decker.
I have Marshall by a lot. Last year, he only had a bad season because he was on a really, really bad team. Not because of him. He's 1 year removed from having 109 catches, 1,500 yards, and 14 touchdowns. Now, I don't think those numbers are repeatable, but there's no reason to think Decker is going to have a better season than him.
Yeah, I think it's Derek Decker for me. I got to be honest with you. I have to go.
Crazy.
I have to go all the way back to 2011.
It's pure hatred for you guys.
Listen, I have to go back.
Probably.
Listen to this stat, though. 2011 was the last time that Eli Manning had 2 1,000-yard.
Why do you have Marshall ranked 33 and Decker ranked 45 then?
Well, here's where
It's ridiculous.
Okay, but here's where I think that it could lean his direction. I do believe he's going to have more touchdowns, but I think that he's going to be touchdown dependent. So if I get closer to drafts and I have to pick one of those guys, it may flip-flop, it may get closer, but I think Decker is going to be, if he gets healthy, which is another big question mark, he's going to actually be a pretty big part of that Titans offense because that's a young receiving core who kind of needs a guy to be the leader there. So I just don't think Eli Manning at this point is more than a one major target quarterback, and he throws the ball away a ton because he is that way, but I just think it's who he is at this point. So I'm going with Decker.
Hey, let's check one more comment here on our live YouTube. Our guy King Reed checked in and said Tyreek Hill. I believe that was in response to the question of what we gave the guy outside the top 20 that we think could end up there. Thoughts on Tyreek, guys?
I love Tyreek's upside. I think obviously with them sending Jeremy Maclin packing, they're obviously also very high on him as taking that next step as a receiver, but they're not going to stop finding ways to give him the ball. So whether he's running it, he's receiving it, whatever they have to do to get him the ball as a wildcat, it doesn't matter. You've got to put the ball in his hands because he's a home run threat every play. So he could give you a ton of yardage this season.
Here's a really interesting point on Tyreek Hill. If you look at Yahoo's mock drafts, his average draft position is 30 points higher than his ranking. overall by players. And the reason for that is because people realize that they're going to get him the ball in many, many different ways. Now, obviously, he's not going to have 1,000 yards receiving, I don't think. But I don't think he's going to be a 1,000-yard receiver. But he's going to have maybe 800 yards receiving, probably give you another 200 rushing to get you to that 1,000 mark. And he has absolutely every potential in the world to be a double-digit touchdown guy between return, rushing, receiving. So that's why even though his ADP is 30 points higher than his actual overall, because people see that he's a playmaker. So definitely a guy to keep your eye on.
All right, well, we got to wrap this edition of the podcast up, but keep sending in those questions, keep sending in those comments. We promise that we're going to do a better job of clearing out some time at the back end of every podcast, and we may even occasionally just throw out a Q&A podcast. Just jump on and answer your questions. So keep sending them in. Don't wait for a post to go up with the announcement of the podcast. If you've got questions you want answered during the week, anytime, you could hit us up on social media, and we would love to interact with you there. Thanks, as always, for checking in on YouTube. Make sure that you subscribe to the channels and get notifications of when we're going live every single week. We stream this puppy live every single Sunday night, right around 9:30. You can subscribe and check us out on iTunes, TuneIn, Libsyn, Google Play, and way more places than I can even remember right now. So go ahead and subscribe to us there. You can go to footballs.com for more details, as well as our fantasy football rankings, which are continuously updating every single day. And even when we have, big arguments like this and things like that, that could be reflected when we make another guy right. It could be reflected that day. So you're going to want to continuously check on those rankings. Plus, to get the deeper rankings at wide receiver, you're going to have to go there as well. Keep up with us on social media too, facebook.com/footballgoons. And on the Twitter, we are at Football Goons. We want to hear from you. We want to hear from the Goon Squad. Send us your questions, your comments, your concerns, your fence building questions. Whatever you want to send us, we would love to hear from you.
I hate you.
We'll catch you all next time.